The battle for Serenity Lake. The morning mist clung to Serenity Lake like a soft blanket, the water so clear you could see the pebbles at the bottom. For James Hartley, a 52-year-old freelance illustrator, this lake was more than just a body of water. It was his sanctuary, a 2.5-acre haven inherited from his grandfather, nestled in the quiet community of Willow Creek Estates, just outside Raleigh, North Carolina. The property, deeded to his family since the 1940s, came with pristine land, a cozy cabin, and memories of fishing trips and sunset conversations. James had built his life around the lake's tranquility, working from his porch with a sketchpad and coffee, far from the chaos of the world. But that peace shattered the day Laura Bennett moved into the neighborhood. Laura, a 34-year-old with sharp green eyes and a polished demeanor, arrived in Willow Creek with an air of purpose. She wore tailored blazers even for casual errands, as if always ready for a boardroom. James later learned she'd been a local TV anchor until a public scandal cost her job, but at the time, she was just the new neighbor with a too bright smile. Their first encounter came on a crisp October morning as James sat on his dock, sketching the herons that frequented the lake. He heard footsteps crunching on the gravel path and looked up to see Laura, holding a professional camera. "Good morning," she called, her voice warm but calculated. "I'm Laura Bennett, just moved in on Oak Lane. Hope you don't mind me exploring. This lake is stunning. What a gem for our community." The phrase "our community" struck James as odd, but he brushed it off as new neighbor enthusiasm. "No trouble at all," he replied, standing to be polite. "I'm James. Welcome to Willow Creek." Laura lingered, snapping photos and asking about the lake's wildlife, its history, and casually its potential for community events. When James mentioned it was private property, passed down from his grandfather, her smile faltered for a split second before returning. "How wonderful to have such a legacy," she said, but her tone felt rehearsed. She left with a wave, and James returned to his sketch, unaware that this was the opening move in a calculated game. Over the next few weeks, Laura became a whirlwind in Willow Creek's Homeowners Association, HOA. The HOA had always been low-key, meeting twice a year to discuss mundane issues like streetlights or holiday decorations. But Laura pushed for monthly gatherings, volunteering as community liaison, and launching a glossy newsletter that landed in every mailbox. The first issue was innocuous resident profiles, trash pickup reminders, but it featured a photo of Serenity Lake, captioned as a community treasure. James felt a twinge of unease, but dismissed it as harmless. The second newsletter was bolder. An article titled "Unlocking Our Neighborhood's Potential" argued for shared access to underutilized spaces, citing other communities that had turned private amenities into public assets. It mentioned property values and environmental stewardship in ways that made James's stomach churn. The byline thanked a legal consultant, Martin Caldwell, for research support. James had never heard of Caldwell, but the mention of legal expertise tied to his lake felt like a red flag. That afternoon, Frank Sullivan, a 60-year-old retired zoning officer who lived across the street, stopped by James's porch. Frank had a no-nonsense air, honed from decades dealing with developers and bureaucrats. "James," he said, settling into a chair, "that Laura's been sniffing around, asking about property lines and old surveys. She's got her eye on your lake, and I've seen this before. Watch yourself." James thanked Frank, but hoped Laura was just an overzealous newcomer. That hope crumbled when the third newsletter arrived, its cover showcasing Serenity Lake with the headline, "A Shared Future for Willow Creek." Inside was a proposal to convert private amenities into community resources, complete with sketches of picnic areas and financial projections. Tucked alongside it was a formal HOA letter summoning James to a mandatory meeting about recreational facility management. The letter warned that absence would be taken as agreement to the proposals. The meeting was set for Sunday at 2 p.m. The warm September sun should have been perfect for relaxing by the lake, but James felt a chill as he walked to the Willow Creek Community Center. The modest building, usually home to book clubs, now felt like a courtroom. 20 residents filled the room more than any HOA meeting in years, clutching newsletters and whispering. Laura had transformed the space into a corporate presentation, with a projector, bottled water, and printed agendas. She wore a navy suit, her pearls gleaming, and stood beside a tall man in his late 40s with silver hair and a sharp suit. Laura opened the meeting with a polished smile. Thank you all for coming. I'm thrilled to introduce Martin Caldwell, our volunteer legal advisor, who's helping us navigate community property management. Her presentation, titled Willow Creek Recreation Plan, featured a photo of James's Lake. She spoke of environmental benefits, property value boosts, and the joys of shared spaces, showing images of other neighborhoods with communal lakes. She subtly raised safety concerns about unmonitored private water, hinting at HOA liability if someone got hurt. Martin Caldwell took the floor, his voice smooth and authoritative. He spread out surveys and documents, claiming that 1940s property lines were often ambiguous by modern standards. He cited legal precedents and reasonable compensation models from other cases, making it sound routine. James realized this wasn't a discussion, it was a sales pitch to take his lake. The room's reaction was mixed. 3 residents, swayed by Laura's charisma, gushed about grandchildren swimming. Others seemed confused but nodded at talk of rising property values. Evelyn Harper, a 70-year-old widow who'd lived in Willow Creek for 40 years, asked pointedly about legal authority, but Laura deflected with vague promises of collaboration. Frank Sullivan demanded to see verified surveys, but Laura's supporters drowned him out. When James stood to protest, explaining his family's clear ownership for 80 years, Laura's allies called him selfish. "We're not taking anything, James," Laura said, her sympathy dripping with condescension. "We're building a better community for everyone." The meeting ended with a motion to explore legal options for lake access. Despite James's objections, it passed 12-8. As he left, Martin Caldwell approached with a thin smile. "Mr. Hartley, this can go smoothly or not. The community wants shared resources. Let's discuss a deal before things escalate." The veiled threat hung heavy as James walked home, his lake shimmering under the afternoon sun. It no longer felt like his sanctuary, it felt like a target. The next morning, James woke to find his lake surrounded by people in matching polo shirts, carrying clipboards and water testing equipment. A van labeled Greenwave Solutions was parked nearby. Furious, he confronted them, but they flashed permits citing public health concerns. When he demanded to know who authorized this, they referred him to Laura. On the phone, Laura was all charm. "James, this is for everyone's safety. We're worried about algae blooms. You want to be a responsible owner, don't you?" Her tone made his objections sound unreasonable. By afternoon, James was on the phone with every lawyer in Raleigh until he found Rachel Morgan, a 45-year-old property rights attorney with a reputation for tenacity. Her office was cluttered with case files, a sign of someone who fought hard for clients. "Mr. Hartley," she said after hearing his story, "this sounds like a deliberate campaign to pressure you into surrendering your property. We need to dig into who's behind it." Rachel's investigation started with Martin Caldwell. She uncovered a troubling history. Caldwell had been involved in 6 similar cases across 3 states, exploiting HOA loopholes to force homeowners out. He'd been disciplined twice by the state bar for misrepresentation and conflicts of interest. "He's not helping out of kindness," Rachel warned. "There's a bigger play here." Meanwhile, Laura's campaign intensified. The local paper ran a story, "Willow Creek seeks fair access to local gym," quoting concerned residents and featuring photos of Serenity Lake. Laura positioned herself as a community hero, while James was painted as a recluse hoarding a public resource. The Greenwave Solutions report soon arrived, claiming alarming algae risks and urging immediate professional management. Rachel had it reviewed by an environmental expert who called it junk science, flawed methods, incomplete data, and normal measurements hyped as dangerous. Greenwave, it turned out, was a shell company formed weeks before Laura hired them. The community split into factions. Laura's supporters formed safety patrols, taking shifts to monitor James's lake, snapping photos, and logging violations. Every morning, James saw someone at his property line, making him feel like a prisoner in his own home. The psychological toll was crushing, but allies emerged. Frank Sullivan dug into county records, confirming James's clear deed from 1942, with no boundary disputes. Evelyn Harper, haunted by a developer's takeover of her old neighborhood decades ago, vowed to fight. And Susan Clark, the HOA treasurer, grew suspicious of Laura's spending. James installed security cameras to document the harassment. The constant scrutiny, the letters demanding compliance. The threat of a court injunction. It was a war of attrition designed to break him. But as he stood on his dock, watching the sunset ripple across Serenity Lake, he remembered his grandfather's words. When someone tries to take what's yours with fancy talk, it's because they know they don't deserve it. James wasn't just fighting for his laquais, was fighting for his family's legacy. The air around Serenity Lake grew heavier as autumn deepened, the golden leaves reflecting on the water, no longer soothing James Hartley. The lake, once his refuge, now felt like a battleground. Laura Bennett's campaign to seize control of his private property had escalated from subtle manipulation to outright aggression, and James was struggling to keep up. The psychological weight of being watched, judged, and vilified by neighbors he'd known for years was relentless. But with Rachel Morgan, his determined attorney, and a handful of loyal allies, James was starting to fight back. The question was whether he could hold out against a machine that seemed to anticipate his every move. Laura's community safety patrols had become a daily fixture. Neighbors, swayed by her promises of a shared lake, took turns standing at the edge of James's property, notebooks in hand, documenting everything from the state of his dock to the birds landing on the water. Their presence was a constant reminder that he was under siege. One morning, James caught a young couple recruited by Laura snapping photos of his cabin. When he asked them to leave, they bristled, claiming they were protecting the neighborhood. The encounter left him shaken, his privacy stripped away by people who'd once waved hello. The harassment wasn't just physical. James's mailbox overflowed with official-looking letters from the HOA, each demanding compliance with vague environmental regulations or threatening legal action. One cited potential runoff violations and gave him 48 hours to submit a water management plan, an impossible task for a private citizen. Rachel recognized the tactic immediately. "They're burying you in paperwork to exhaust you," she said. "It's designed to make fighting feel harder than giving up." Laura's media campaign was equally ruthless. The Raleigh Herald published another article. Tensions rise over Willow Creek's hidden treasure, painting James as a stubborn loner blocking progress. Laura's quotes were masterful, blending concern for community safety with hints of James's uncooperative behavior. The article included a glossy photo of Serenity Lake, taken from an angle that made it look like a public park. James felt his reputation crumbling, but Rachel urged patience. "They're overplaying their hand," she said. "We just need evidence to expose them." That evidence began to emerge through the efforts of James's allies. Frank Sullivan, the retired zoning officer, spent days at the county recorder's office, combing through Willow Creek's property records. His findings were gold. James's deed was ironclad, with surveys from 1942 and 1975 clearly defining Serenity Lake as private property. More intriguingly, Frank discovered that Laura had been asking pointed questions about land values and development potential, suggesting her motives went beyond a community swimming hole. "She's not after picnics," Frank said, handing James a stack of notes. "This smells like a land grab." Evelyn Harper, the 70-year-old widow, brought her own perspective. Decades earlier, she'd watched a developer dismantle her former neighborhood by pitting residents against each other. They'd create fake problem safety issues, environmental scares until people were too tired to fight, she told James over coffee. "Laura's using the same playbook, but we're not letting her win this time." Evelyn's resolve strengthened James, reminding him he wasn't alone. The most damning discovery came from Susan Clark, the HOA treasurer. While reviewing financial records, she noticed $18,000 in unexplained expenses, legal fees, and consulting costs approved by Laura without board oversight. The payments went to obscure companies with names like Community Growth Solutions. Susan's accounting background made her meticulous, and she traced the funds to a P.O. box linked to Martin Caldwell. "They're using our dues to fund this attack," she told James, her voice trembling with anger. "This isn't just about your Lake Heights theft." Rachel's investigation into Martin Caldwell painted a darker picture. Caldwell wasn't just a shady lawyer. He was a key player in a network tied to Horizon Properties, a development firm known for snapping up residential land for luxury projects. Phone records showed Caldwell in regular contact with Victor Ramsey, Horizon's regional director, starting months before Laura moved to Willow Creek. Rachel's private investigator uncovered that Horizon had quietly bought 2 other properties in the neighborhood, both from elderly owners pressured to sell after HOA disputes. James's Lake, 2.5 acres of prime waterfront, was their ultimate prize, perfect for a high-end resort or condos. Laura's role became clearer when Rachel obtained financial records showing she'd received monthly payments from Community Growth Solutions, the same shell company tied to Caldwell. The payments began 2 months before she arrived in Willow Creek, confirming she was a hired operative, not a concerned neighbor. Her failed TV career and mounting debts had made her an ideal recruit for Horizon's scheme. "She's their front," Rachel explained. "Her job is to rally the community, create a legal pretext, and wear you down." The fake environmental tests were another piece of the puzzle. Greenwave Solutions, the company behind the alarming algae report, was owned by Caldwell's cousin. Their equipment was mostly for show, designed to look official in photos. The report's health hazards were fabricated to justify court action and sway public opinion. When the Herald ran a story about toxic risks at Serenity Lake, it amplified the lie, turning more neighbors against James. But Laura and Caldwell had underestimated Willow Creek's long-term residents. Evelyn's stories of past developer schemes resonated, and Susan's financial audit raised red flags. Even some of Laura's supporters began to waver, uncomfortable with the aggressive tactics. One neighbor, Tom Grayson, approached James privately, admitting he'd been swayed by Laura's promises of a community dock. "I didn't realize it was your family's land," he said. "This feels wrong." The harassment reached a new low when James found a court notice taped to his door, a preliminary injunction hearing to grant the HOA temporary access to Serenity Lake pending an environmental review. The hearing was set for 10 days away, leaving James little time to prepare. Laura and Caldwell were moving fast, betting he'd crack under pressure. Rachel saw it as their endgame. "They want to tie you up in court until you sell," she said. "But we're going to turn this around." James's security cameras became his lifeline. They captured Laura trespassing at night, measuring the shoreline with a tape measure. They recorded her supporters rehearsing concerns to report, proving their environmental claims were scripted. Most damningly, they caught Caldwell handing envelopes to Greenwave technicians, likely payments or instructions. Rachel compiled the footage into a timeline, alongside phone records showing Laura, Caldwell, and Victor Ramsey coordinating around HOA meetings and media hits. The community was fracturing. Laura organized an emergency meeting to address escalating tensions, expecting to rally support. Instead, she faced tough questions. Evelyn stood up, her voice steady. "I've lived here 40 years, and that lake's never been a problem. Why are we suddenly obsessed with it? Who's paying for all this?" Susan followed, presenting her audit. Laura approved $18,000 in unauthorized payments to companies tied to her lawyer. "We've been funding an attack on James with our own money." The room erupted, with residents shouting over Laura's flustered explanations. Laura's composure cracked. She teared up, claiming she was intimidated by the accusations, but her performance fell flat. Frank unveiled a timeline of her deception, from her arrival to her secret payments. 3 residents walked out, furious at being manipulated. Caldwell tried to deflect, claiming Laura acted alone, but Rachel's phone records proved their collusion. The meeting marked a turning point. Laura's grip on Willow Creek was slipping. But Laura wasn't done. Sensing her plan unraveling, she filed criminal complaints against James, accusing him of threatening community safety and harassing neighbors. The charges were based on doctored footage and out-of-context photos, but they led to James's arrest one rainy evening. As he sat in a holding cell, the reality hit. Laura was willing to destroy his life to win. The Herald ran a headline, "Willow Creek resident arrested amid lake dispute," further tarnishing his name. The arrest was meant to break James, but it backfired. The charges were so transparently false that they fueled suspicion about Laura's motives. Rachel worked frantically to secure bail, delivering stunning news. The FBI is investigating Horizon Properties for a multi-state land fraud scheme. Your case is part of a bigger pattern. James's fight was no longer just about Serenity Lake. It was exposing a criminal enterprise. As the injunction hearing loomed, James felt the weight of the past months. Sleepless nights, strained friendships, and mounting legal bills had taken a toll. Standing on his dock one evening, he stared at the lake's glassy surface, questioning if the fight was worth it. Selling seemed tempting, a way to escape the chaos. But then he remembered his grandfather's voice. Don't let smooth talkers steal what's yours. This wasn't just about land, it was about justice, about standing up to bullies who thought they could buy or bully their way to anything. Rachel arrived the next morning with a bombshell. Her investigator had obtained a recording of Laura, Caldwell, and Victor Ramsey discussing their exit strategy if the legal route failed. They spoke of making James's life hell until he sold and referenced other targets for similar schemes. The recording was a smoking gun, proof of conspiracy and fraud. This changes everything, Rachel said. We're not just defending your Lequerie, taking them down. The HOA, meanwhile, was in chaos. Susan called an emergency vote, and Laura was ousted as liaison by a 14-4 margin. Residents who'd backed her apologized, offering to testify about her deception. Evelyn shared her story of past developer fights, rallying the community. Frank circulated a petition supporting James's property rights, signed by 25 residents. The tide was turning, but the hearing was days away. James knew the courtroom would be his last stand. The days leading up to the preliminary injunction hearing were a blur of tension and preparation for James Hartley. Serenity Lake, once a symbol of peace, now stood at the heart of a legal storm that had divided Willow Creek estates and thrust James into a fight he never wanted. Laura Bennett and her accomplice, Martin Caldwell, backed by the shadowy Horizon Properties, had orchestrated a sophisticated campaign to seize his private lake through manipulation, fake science, and community pressure. But cracks were forming in their plan. With Rachel Morgan, his fierce attorney, and allies like Frank Sullivan, Evelyn Harper, and Susan Clark, James was no longer the isolated target. The tide was turning, and the courtroom loomed as the battleground where truth would face off against deceit. James's arrest on Laura's trumped-up charges had been a low point, but it galvanized his resolve. Released on bail after a humiliating night in jail, he returned home to find supportive notes from neighbors slipped under his door. The Raleigh Herald article about his arrest, meant to vilify him, had instead raised questions about Laura's motives. A local reporter, digging deeper, noted inconsistencies in her community advocate narrative, hinting at hidden funding. The public scrutiny Laura craved was now her liability, and James sensed an opportunity to strike back. Rachel's strategy was meticulous. She compiled a mountain of evidence: security footage of Laura's trespassing, phone records linking her to Caldwell and Victor Ramsey of Horizon Properties, and the damning recording of their conspiracy. The audio, captured by Rachel's investigator, was chilling. In it, Laura laughed about breaking James, while Caldwell outlined plans to bury him in legal fees. Ramsey, the Horizon executive, referred to Serenity Lake as the keystone for a luxury resort project, admitting they'd targeted other neighborhoods with similar schemes. This is our test run, he said. If we crack Hartley, the rest of Willow Creek falls. The recording transformed James's case from a local dispute to a federal investigation into property fraud. The FBI's involvement was a game-changer. Rachel learned that Horizon Properties was under scrutiny in 8 states for using legal harassment and fake community campaigns to force property sales. James's refusal to fold had exposed a criminal network, and his case was now a cornerstone in a broader probe. You're not just saving your lake, Rachel told him, her eyes gleaming with determination. You're giving dozens of families a chance at justice. In Willow Creek, Laura's influence was crumbling. Susan Clark's audit of the HOA's finances revealing $18,000 in misdirected funds had shocked residents. At an emergency meeting, Susan presented bank records showing payments to Caldwell's shell companies, approved by Laura without oversight. We trusted her with our money, Susan said, her voice steady but furious, and she used it to attack one of our own. The room buzzed with outrage. Laura's tearful defense, claiming she was misguided by Caldwell, fell flat when Frank Sullivan displayed a timeline of her actions, from her paid arrival to her fake environmental scares. The meeting ended with a vote of no confidence, stripping Laura of her HOA role by a landslide. Several of her former supporters, like Tom Grayson, approached James to apologize. She made it sound like we'd all benefit, Tom admitted. I didn't see the bigger picture. Evelyn Harper's stories of past developer schemes resonated, framing Laura as an outsider exploiting their trust. Frank's petition, now with 30 signatures, declared Willow Creek's support for James's property rights. The community was rallying, but Laura wasn't done fighting. Desperate to salvage her plan, Laura doubled down. She leaked a news story to a regional paper, the Carolina Times, titled Property Rights versus Community Good. The article portrayed James as a greedy recluse denying children a safe place to swim, while Laura was the embattled hero fighting for fairness. But the reporter, sensing a deeper story, contacted Rachel for comment. Rachel provided a carefully worded statement about coordinated efforts to undermine property rights, hinting at evidence without revealing her hand. The article, meant to bury James, instead amplified scrutiny on Laura's funding and motives. Laura's final gambit was personal. 2 days before the hearing, she appeared at James's cabin with 2 neighbors as witnesses, her smile as polished as ever. "James, let's end this," she said, her tone syrupy. "Sign over access to the lake, and the charges go away. We can all move on." When James refused, her mask slipped. "You're making a mistake," she hissed. "This gets uglier from here." The threat, witnessed by Frank Sullivan from across the street, was caught on James's security cameras, adding to Rachel's arsenal. The harassment intensified. Laura's safety patrols grew bolder, with one member attempting to plant a fake hazard sign near the lake until James's cameras caught them. Anonymous letters arrived, accusing James of endangering the community. The stress was relentless, affecting his work and health. He hadn't slept properly in weeks, and his freelance clients were noticing delays. There were moments when selling the lake seemed like the only way to escape, but each time, he'd walk to the dock and hear his grandfather's voice. "They don't have the right to take it, James. Don't let them." Rachel's investigation uncovered more dirt on Horizon Properties. The company had a history of targeting small communities, using operatives like Laura to infiltrate HOAs and create pretexts for land acquisition. 2 other Willow Creek properties, sold under pressure, were now part of Horizon's portfolio. Serenity Lake was the linchpin its waterfront value could justify a multi-million-dollar development. Rachel also found that Greenwave Solutions, the fake environmental firm, had been used in 3 other Horizon schemes, always producing alarming reports to pressure owners. The community's awakening gained momentum. Evelyn organized a truth meeting at her home, where 15 residents reviewed Rachel's evidence. Tom Grayson, now fully on James's side, admitted Laura had promised him a leadership role in her new HOA. Another neighbor, Clara Nguyen, revealed Laura had offered her family free lake access if they supported her. The revelations turned Laura's allies into whistleblowers, strengthening James's case. As the hearing approached, Rachel prepared James for Judge Eleanor Thompson, a no-nonsense jurist known for dismantling fraudulent claims. Thompson had previously sanctioned Caldwell for misrepresenting evidence in a property case, giving Rachel confidence. "She'll see through their lies," Rachel said. "But we need to be airtight." They rehearsed James's testimony, focusing on his family's 80-year ownership and the harassment campaign. Rachel planned to call Dr. Lisa Patel, an environmental scientist, to debunk Greenwave's report, and a forensic accountant to expose the financial trail. The night before the hearing, James stood on his dock, the lake's surface like a mirror under the stars. The lights from neighboring homes glowed, but they no longer felt like a mockery of his isolation. Many of those homes now housed allies, people who'd seen through Laura's deception. Yet the personal toll was undeniable. His savings were dwindling, his health was fraying, and the community he'd loved was scarred by division. He wondered if his grandfather, a Korean War veteran who'd faced real battles, would think this fight was worth it. A memory surfaced, fishing with his grandfather at 14, the old man pointing to the lake. "This is yours to protect, James. Not just for you, but for everyone who comes after. Don't let greed take it." The words anchored him. This wasn't just about Serenity Lake, it was about standing against those who used lies and power to steal what wasn't theirs. If he gave up, Laura and Horizon would move on to the next victim, and Willow Creek might never recover. The morning of the hearing, Rachel arrived with news. The FBI had raided Horizon's regional office, seizing documents that corroborated James's case. "Your fight's gone national," she said. "Horizon's scrambling, and Laura and Caldwell are exposed." The news was a lifeline, but James knew the courtroom would be the true test. As he dressed in his best suit, He felt his grandfather's presence, steadying him for the battle ahead. At the courthouse, Willow Creek residents filled the gallery, their presence a mix of support and curiosity. Laura sat at the plaintiff's table, her business suit impeccable, still playing the role of community champion. Caldwell, surrounded by folders, projected confidence, but his eyes darted to Judge Thompson's bench. The judge entered, her expression stern, and set the tone. I expect truth and transparency today. Misrepresentation will not be tolerated. Caldwell opened with Laura's testimony, a performance honed by her TV days. She spoke of feeling threatened by James's hostility, presenting edited footage that made him look aggressive. She teared up, claiming she only wanted a safe space for kids. Caldwell followed with Greenwave's report, waving charts about toxic algae and public health risks. He called neighbors to testify about James's uncooperative behavior, painting him as a threat to Willow Creek's harmony. The room was tense, and James felt the weight of every eye on him. Laura's narrative was compelling, and for a moment, he feared it might sway the judge. But Rachel was ready. She stood, her voice calm but commanding, and called Dr. Lisa Patel. The scientist dismantled Greenwave's report with precision, calling it scientifically indefensible and pointing out normal lake readings hyped as dangers. This wouldn't pass a college lab review, she said, drawing murmurs from the gallery. Rachel then called the forensic accountant, who traced the $18,000 in HOA funds to Caldwell's shell companies. The revelation stunned the audience, with Susan Clark nodding fiercely from the back. But the knockout blow was the recording. As Laura's voice filled the courtroom, admitting to making James's life hell, the room fell silent. Caldwell's assurances of legality sounded hollow, and Ramsey's talk of a test run exposed the corporate greed behind it all. Laura's composure shattered. She shouted that Caldwell had misled her, claiming she was promised a job with Horizon. Caldwell tried to deflect, but the recording tied them together. Judge Thompson's eyes narrowed, her patience visibly thinning. James felt a flicker of hope this was the moment he'd fought for. The courtroom in Raleigh was thick with anticipation as Judge Eleanor Thompson leaned forward, her gaze piercing through the facade of Laura Bennett and Martin Caldwell. James Hartley sat behind his attorney, Rachel Morgan, his heart pounding but steadied by the weight of the evidence they'd amassed. Serenity Lake, the 2.5-acre legacy of his grandfather, was at stake in this preliminary injunction hearing, but the fight had grown far beyond a neighborhood dispute. It was now a battle against a corporate conspiracy, with Horizon Properties' multi-state fraud scheme unraveling in real time. The recording of Laura, Caldwell, and Victor Ramsey plotting to break James had stunned the room, and the tide was firmly against them. But Laura wasn't one to go down without a fight, and James braced for her final moves. Rachel Morgan's presentation was methodical, dismantling the plaintiff's case with surgical precision. After Dr. Lisa Patel exposed Greenwave Solutions' fake environmental report and the forensic accountant revealed the $18,000 in misappropriated HOA funds, Rachel called Frank Sullivan to the stand. The retired zoning officer, with his gruff demeanor and decades of experience, presented the county records that confirmed James's airtight deed. The Hartley property, including Serenity Lake, has been clearly defined since 1942, Frank said, holding up certified surveys. There's no ambiguity, no dispute except the one manufactured here. Next came Evelyn Harper, the 70-year-old widow whose moral clarity electrified the courtroom. Evelyn recounted her experience with a developer's takeover in her old neighborhood, drawing parallels to Laura's tactics. They used the same tricks: fake safety concerns, community division, legal threats, she said, her voice steady. They tore my old home apart, and I won't let it happen to James or Willow Creek. Her testimony resonated, with residents in the gallery nodding, some wiping tears. Evelyn's story wasn't just about James, it was a warning about what unchecked greed could do to any community. Rachel saved the security footage for last. Projected on a screen, the clips showed Laura trespassing on James's property at night, measuring the shoreline, and coaching her safety patrol to fabricate violations. One video captured Caldwell handing envelopes to Greenwave technicians, their furtive glances betraying their intent. The most damning footage showed Laura's confrontation at James's cabin, her veiled threat clear. This gets uglier from here. The gallery buzzed with outrage, and Judge Thompson's pen scratched furiously as she took notes. Laura's unraveling was palpable. When Rachel played the recording again, highlighting Ramsey's admission that Serenity Lake was a test run for Horizon's broader scheme, Laura snapped. "He lied to me," she shouted, pointing at Caldwell. "Martin said it was all legal, that I'd get a job with Horizon if I delivered the lake." Her outburst, raw and desperate, confirmed her role as a paid operative. Caldwell tried to salvage his credibility, claiming he'd only provided limited advice, but the phone records Rachel submitted showing hundreds of calls with Laura and Ramsey exposed his lie. The judge's expression hardened, and James felt a surge of vindication. Rachel called James to testify, and he spoke with quiet conviction. "This lake has been in my family for 80 years, he said, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "My grandfather taught me to fish here, to respect it, to protect it. I've never denied anyone a view or a kind word, but Laura and her team turned my neighbors against me with lies. They trespassed, harassed me, and tried to ruin my life to steal what's mine. I'm fighting for my home, but also for every person who's faced this kind of bullying." His words struck a chord, with residents like Susan Clark and Tom Grayson nodding in solidarity. Caldwell's cross-examination was weak, his questions aimed at painting James as uncooperative. "Didn't you refuse to discuss community access, Mr. Hartley?" he asked, his tone smug. James didn't flinch. "I refuse to let you take my private property based on fabricated problems," he replied. "You never asked for a discussion, you demanded surrender." The exchange drew murmurs of approval, and Caldwell sat down, visibly rattled. Laura's final witness was a neighbor, Karen Walsh, who'd been promised a role in Laura's HOA administration. Karen nervously claimed James had intimidated her during a patrol, but Rachel's cross-examination was devastating. She showed footage of Karen planting a fake hazard sign, contradicting her story. "Were you instructed to lie, Ms. Walsh?" Rachel asked. Karen stammered, admitting Laura had suggested what to say. The testimony collapsed, and Laura's face drained of color. Judge Thompson called a recess, and the courtroom buzzed with speculation. Outside, Laura tried one last desperate ploy, approaching James in the hallway. "Drop this now, and I'll make the charges disappear," she whispered, her eyes wild. "You don't know how far this can go." Court security intervened, escorting her away, but her words lingered, a reminder of her willingness to destroy him. James returned to the courtroom, bolstered by Rachel's confidence. "She's out of moves," Rachel said. Thompson seized the truth. When the hearing resumed, Rachel delivered her closing argument. "This case isn't about community access, it's about a coordinated conspiracy to defraud James Hartley of his rightful property," she said. "Laura Bennett, Martin Caldwell, and Horizon Properties used fake science, stolen HOA funds, and relentless harassment to pressure a homeowner into submission. The evidence is overwhelming. Recordings, financial trails, and their own words prove their intent. We ask that the injunction be denied, the charges against Mr. Hartley dismissed, and this fraud be investigated fully." Caldwell's closing was a disjointed mess, leaning on vague claims of community benefit and accusing James of obstructing progress. But the recording had gutted his case, and his attempts to distance himself from Laura only highlighted their collusion. Judge Thompson listened impassively, then delivered her ruling with the weight of a gavel. "The evidence presented today reveals a shocking abuse of trust and legal process," she began, her voice cutting through the silence. "The plaintiff's claims of environmental necessity are baseless, supported by a fraudulent report from a sham company. The financial misconduct, diversion of HOA funds, and recorded admissions of intent to harass Mr. Hartley point to a deliberate conspiracy. All charges against Mr. Hartley are dismissed with prejudice. The injunction is denied. Ms. Bennett is ordered to pay Mr. Hartley's legal fees and is subject to a permanent restraining order barring contact with him or his property." The courtroom erupted in applause, with Evelyn Harper wiping tears and Frank Sullivan pumping his fist. Thompson wasn't finished. "Mr. Caldwell, your conduct raises serious ethical concerns. I'm referring your actions to the State Bar for review, and I'm recommending a federal investigation into this scheme." She turned to the gallery. "This court will not tolerate the manipulation of communities for profit." Case closed. James exhaled, the weight of months lifting as neighbors surrounded him, offering handshakes and apologies. Susan Clark hugged him, her reserved demeanor cracked by relief. "We let her fool us," she said. "But you showed us the truth." Tom Grayson, once Laura's ally, shook James's hand. "I'm sorry, man. I didn't know." Even the Raleigh Herald reporter approached, asking for an interview to set the record straight. Outside, Laura slipped away, her head bowed, while Caldwell was swarmed by angry residents demanding answers. James and Rachel walked to her car, the autumn air crisp with promise. "This isn't over," Rachel said. "The FBI's digging into Horizon, and your case is their roadmap. You didn't just save your lake, you blew the lid off a criminal network." That night, James sat on his dock, the lake shimmering under the moon. The victory was sweet, but the scars remained: strained friendships, sleepless nights, and a community still healing. He thought of his grandfather, who'd faced far worse to protect this land. The fight had been worth it, not just for Serenity Lake, but for the principle that no one should lose their home to lies and greed. The aftermath unfolded swiftly. The Herald ran a front-page story, "Willow Creek Fraud Exposed," detailing the conspiracy and Horizon's ties to similar schemes. Laura vanished from Willow Creek, her rental home emptied overnight. Caldwell faced a bar investigation, his law practice crumbling under scrutiny. The FBI's probe into Horizon gained traction, with James's evidence sparking lawsuits from victims in other states. But the personal toll lingered. James's freelance work had suffered, his savings were depleted, and some neighbors still viewed him with suspicion, swayed by Laura's lingering lies. He wondered if Willow Creek could ever feel like home again. Yet, as he watched a heron glide across the lake, he felt a quiet resolve. The fight had changed him, but it had also changed his community for the better. The weeks following the courtroom victory were a bittersweet mix of relief and reckoning for James Hartley. Serenity Lake, the 2.5-acre jewel at the heart of Willow Creek Estates, was his once more legally, undeniably. The preliminary injunction hearing had not only dismissed Laura Bennett's baseless claims, but also exposed her, Martin Caldwell, and Horizon Properties as architects of a sophisticated fraud. Judge Eleanor Thompson's ruling had reverberated beyond Raleigh, sparking a federal investigation into a multi-state property theft scheme. Yet, as James sat on his dock, watching the winter sun dip below the pines, he grappled with the scars of the fight. The lake was safe, but the cost: emotional, financial, and communal lingered. This final chapter of his saga would be about rebuilding, reflecting, and ensuring no one else faced what he had. The Raleigh Herald's expose, "Willow Creek Fraud Exposed," hit newsstands days after the hearing, detailing Laura's paid role, Caldwell's legal manipulations, and Horizon's predatory land grabs. The article, penned by a reporter who'd grown skeptical of Laura's narrative, included quotes from James, Rachel Morgan, and residents like Evelyn Harper. It painted James not as the villain Laura had crafted, but as a steadfast homeowner who'd unmasked a criminal enterprise. The story went viral, picked up by regional outlets, and shared across social media, turning Serenity Lake into a symbol of resistance against corporate greed. Laura's disappearance was swift and silent. Neighbors reported seeing a moving van at her rental home under cover of darkness, her polished persona reduced to a fleeting shadow. Rumors swirled that she'd fled to avoid legal fallout. As the FBI's probe into Horizon Properties intensified, Martin Caldwell wasn't so lucky. The state bar launched a formal investigation into his conduct, and his law firm's website went offline within a week. Clients dropped him, and whispers of pending federal charges followed. Victor Ramsey, Horizon's regional director, was named in a Carolina Times report as a key figure in the FBI's crosshairs, his lavish office raided for documents. James received a letter from the North Carolina Attorney General's office 3 months later, confirming that his case had catalyzed a broader crackdown. Horizon faced charges in 9 states, with Serenity Lake cited as the linchpin that exposed their playbook: infiltrate communities, fabricate crises, and pressure owners into selling. Dozens of families, from Virginia to Texas, were filing lawsuits, inspired by James's stand. "Your courage has given others a voice," the letter read. James framed it, hanging it in his cabin beside a photo of his grandfather fishing on the lake. Willow Creek Estates began to heal, but the process was uneven. The HOA, shaken by Susan Clark's audit, implemented new transparency rules, requiring board approval for all expenditures. Susan was elected president, her accountant's precision restoring trust. Evelyn Harper organized community potlucks to mend frayed bonds, inviting James as the guest of honor. At the first event, Tom Grayson and Clara Nguyen, once Laura's supporters, approached him with heartfelt apologies. "We bought her lies," Clara said, her eyes downcast. "You didn't deserve what we put you through." James shook their hands, accepting their remorse, but knowing some wounds would take time. Frank Sullivan remained a rock, stopping by James's porch with coffee and updates. He dug deeper into Horizon's activities, uncovering options they'd placed on 4 other Willow Creek properties, contingent on acquiring James's lake. "If you'd folded," Frank said, "half this neighborhood would be a resort by now." His words underscored the stakes, but also the victory. The petition Frank had circulated, signed by 35 residents, now hung in the community center as a reminder of their collective stand. James's personal recovery was slower. The legal battle had drained his savings, forcing him to take on extra freelance work to cover Rachel's fees, which Laura was ordered to pay but hadn't. His health had suffered stress-induced migraines, and sleepless nights left him gaunt. His freelance clients, once patient, had moved on, and rebuilding his business was daunting. Socially, he felt a lingering distance from some neighbors who still believed Laura's smears. At the grocery store, he'd catch sidelong glances, whispers of "that lake guy." The isolation stung, but he refused to let it define him. Rachel Morgan became more than an attorney, she was a friend. She checked in weekly, updating him on the FBI's progress and reassuring him that Laura's non-payment would be addressed. "You're a hero, James," she said during one call. "Not just for Willow Creek, but for every small town Horizon targeted." Her words helped, but James didn't feel heroic. He felt tired, worn by months of fighting a war he hadn't chosen. Yet, each time he doubted himself, he'd walk to the lake, its calm surface a reminder of why he'd fought. The community's gratitude manifested in small but meaningful ways. Evelyn baked him her famous pecan pie, leaving it on his porch with a note, "For our lake's guardian." Tom Grayson offered to repair James's dock for free, spending a weekend sanding and staining it. Susan organized a fundraiser to offset his legal costs, raising $5,000 from residents who'd once doubted him. These gestures rebuilt James's faith in Willow Creek, proving that Laura's division hadn't broken their spirit. A pivotal moment came at a spring HOA meeting, where James was invited to speak. Standing before 40 residents, he shared his story, not just the legal fight, but the personal toll. "This lake is my family's legacy, but it's also part of this community's heart," he said. "I fought for it because I believe we all deserve to protect what's ours, without fear of lies or greed tearing us apart." The room applauded, and for the first time in months, James felt truly at home. The meeting ended with a unanimous vote to strengthen HOA bylaws, ensuring no outsider could exploit them again. The FBI's investigation bore fruit 6 months later. Horizon Properties executives, including Victor Ramsey, were indicted on charges of conspiracy, wire fraud, and racketeering. The Raleigh Herald reported that Serenity Lake's case had provided critical evidence, from the recording to James's security footage. Over 50 families across the country were pursuing restitution, and James was asked to testify in a federal trial. He agreed, not for vengeance, but to ensure Horizon's victims got justice. Financially, James began to stabilize. A new client, inspired by the Herald's story, hired him for a major illustration project, praising his resilience. Laura's court-ordered payment finally came through, coerced by Rachel's relentless motions, covering most of his legal bills. James used the funds to repair his cabin and install a new security system, a precaution against future threats. Physically, he was recovering, his migraines fading as he resumed morning walks around the lake. One evening, as summer approached, James sat on his dock, sketching the herons that had returned with the warmer weather. The lake was peaceful again, its surface unbroken except for the occasional ripple of a fish. Neighboring homes glowed with life, their lights no longer a reminder of isolation but of a community reborn. James thought of his grandfather, whose lessons about standing firm had carried him through. "You'd be proud," he whispered to the water, feeling a connection that transcended time. The fight had changed James. He was no longer the quiet illustrator content to blend in. He'd become an advocate, speaking at local forums about property rights and community vigilance. He joined the HOA board, working with Susan to protect Willow Creek from future predators. His story inspired a documentary proposal, which he was considering, hoping to amplify the voices of others who'd faced similar battles. As he closed his sketchbook, James reflected on the broader lesson. Laura and Horizon had exploited trust, turning neighbors into pawns, but Willow Creek's awakening proved that truth and unity could prevail. The lake, his grandfather's gift, was more than land. It was a testament to resilience, a reminder that justice, though hard won, was worth every sacrifice. James stood, the sunset painting Serenity Lake in hues of gold and crimson. The nightmare was over, the legacy secure. He walked back to his cabin, ready for a new chapter, not as a victim, but as a man who'd fought for what was right and won. Thank you for following James's journey. His battle against greed and deception raises questions we all face. How do we respond to injustice in our lives? Have you or someone you know faced a similar fight against bullies, corporations, or systems that exploit trust? In the comments below, share your stories and perspectives on standing up to violence, whether physical, emotional, or legal. Do you believe communities can overcome division to fight for what's right? Or are we too easily swayed by smooth talkers like Laura? Take a stand, voice your thoughts, and let's spark a conversation about justice and resilience. Your story matters.